Welcome back. Last time we covered the different schools of Islamic law. In this segment, we'll discuss the status of women in Islam, as well as questions concerning hijab, women's inheritance rights, and misconceptions regarding women's status in legal testimony. In general, theories and norms of gender relations in Islamic society have been drawn from the religion and also to a certain extent mixed with regional social customs and habits, some of which it has accepted and others which it has fought against. Non-Muslims are often curious and often critical based on misunderstandings concerning the status of women in Islamic society. When learning about women in the Sharia, the non-Muslim should try to look at the issue not simply through the lens of the values of contemporary Western society. And he or she should keep in mind that the values of Western society change from one generation to another. We should not absolutize the transient. In the domain of male-female relations, it's important to try to understand other points of view. The Quran states, "We have created you in pairs." According to the Sharia, men and women are equal before God, and they share equally in religious responsibilities. Heaven and hell and the purgatories are not only accessible, but they are the necessary concomitant of human life for both sexes. All the Quranic verses that refer to the religious responsibilities and religious opportunities of human beings always use both the male and female verbs and nouns. All of the religious injunctions of Islam are incumbent upon both sexes, and the same is true for moral injunction. Questions always arise concerning the hijab or veil that many Muslim women wear. Let's recall that all the icons of the Virgin Mary show her veiled. Many Christian women in the Middle East until recently used to cover their hair, as do Muslim women. This covering has to do with modesty defined by both Islam and Christianity. The Quran says that believing women should not display their beauty and ornaments. What does ornament, zina, mean? Although there is scholarly consensus on a minimum definition of this, different cultural zones of the Islamic world have often practiced this in different ways. In the last 2 decades, a movement has begun among Muslim women to choose to wear the hijab as a means of self-identity and protection. It's a sign of piety, but also of their self-identification as Muslims with all that entails. However, no one has the right to impose this on Muslim women, according to scholars at El-Ansary University. Islam has always considered the role of men and women to be complementary rather than egalitarian. When it comes to inheritance, the Quranic law is unequal. A son inherits twice as much as a daughter. This reflects the fact that the male should be totally responsible for all the expenses of his immediate family. A woman has no responsibility from the point of view of the Sharia to spend her own money on the family. In this regard, a woman has complete economic independence from her husband. But in other cases, a woman may inherit more than a man. It's important to keep in mind that the rules of inheritance are very detailed, and the determining factors are 3. 1, the level of relationship to the deceased. Those closest to the deceased receive a larger share than those further away. 2, the generational level of those compared to the deceased. The son of the deceased receives a higher portion than the father of the deceased. And 3, the financial responsibility of those who are inheriting. When all these circumstances are considered, and if a chart of all the possibilities were drafted, what we would see is that in over 30 situations, women inherit equal to or more than men. In only 4 circumstances is the inheritance of men twice that of women. Similar misunderstandings apply to the testimony of a woman being equal to half that of a man. Introducing testimony into court and accepting it as conclusive has nothing to do with whether the person is male or female. Once the judge is satisfied with the testimony presented and feels that the evidence is conclusive, no more testimony is needed, and the judge can issue a ruling. There are several instances of this in the Sunnah. Truth, therefore, is not a function of gender or number of testimonies, but rather clear evidence. The confusion on this issue comes from a Quranic recommendation, not requirement, for 2 female witnesses for 1 male witness on contracts involving loans. This served to protect a woman, particularly in the past. Recall that the Quran is a guide for all time and all places. In case a woman's testimony contradicted a man's, she wouldn't be intimidated if she had another female witness. Moreover, there are certain cases in which women are more knowledgeable and have far more experience than men, and in some of these situations, the testimony of a man isn't accepted at all, and only that of a woman is. In short, such issues depend on circumstances that can vary by time and space. The only case in which 4 witnesses, whether male or female, is required is adultery. Now, since committing adultery in front of 4 living witnesses would be a pretty stupid thing to do, to say the least, it's practically impossible to prove in court. Jewish law requires only 2 living witnesses, and even that's practically impossible to prove in court. Moreover, even if one could prove it, the scholars at El-Azhar University, which is located in Cairo, Egypt, have ruled that the social and economic conditions in Egypt are no longer the tight-knit social and economic relations of the past. Accordingly, severe punishments such as stoning for adultery, amputation for theft, and so on, cannot be carried out in Egypt. In fact, such punishments have not been carried out in Egypt for over 1,000 years. Our reading in the Heart of Islam provides an excellent discussion on this issue for the Islamic world as a whole. In short, the scholars of each region of the Islamic world must examine the social and economic conditions of their regions to come to an all things considered judgment when making ijtihad under these new conditions. Finally, there's an important Gallup poll on what Muslim women want in Chapter 4 of Who Speaks for Islam, What Over 1 Billion Muslims Really Think by John Esposito and Dalia Mogahed. The chapter concludes by noting the need to move beyond the feminism versus fundamentalism debate, since Muslim women value both their religion and their rights, seeking to assert their rights through their religion, not in opposition to it. In short, the feminism versus fundamentalism debate is a false dichotomy. This concludes our discussion of gender and Sharia. In the next segment, we'll turn to an overview of Islamic economic and social institutions from an Islamic legal perspective.